Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The president of the Ivy League school stepped down Saturday in response to a firestorm of criticism over her response at a congressional hearing on the rise in anti-Semitism on U.S. campuses. Where is the line drawn between expressing anti-Semitism and the right to free speech in the U.S.? And what will be the long-term impacts of U.S. public division over the Gaza conflict? And in the UN, the U.S. has vetoed another resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. What does this mean for the ongoing conflict? To discuss these issues and more, I'm glad to be joined today by Rick Dunham, visiting scholar at Tsinghua University in Beijing, Peter Kuznick, professor of history at American University, and Professor Diesen at the University of South-Eastern Norway. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Rick, I will start with you. I want your initial response, to what happened, to the whole incident. Of course, there's a controversial reply to seems to be a simple question. Is the call for genocide of any ethnic group, any people against the code of conduct on the U.S. College campuses? And of course, the latest is the president of the University of Pennsylvania has decided to step down, and you are a graduate of this university. What do you make of it?
Well, it seems like such a simple question, but this really is a complex set of questions that we're wading into that deal with fundamental issues of academic freedom and about public discourse. Let me start as a Penn graduate, and I am a proud Penn graduate. I mean, I was embarrassed for the university. Her performance before the congressional committee was halting, was, I would call it over-lawyered, meaning she was answering questions the way lawyers would tell her. She was not communicating very well with the public. It was a hostile forum, and the Republican who was in charge of the hearing definitely was trying to trap the members, the three presidents. Unfortunately, I believe they all fell into the trap. It's easy to answer the question, are you against mass murder? Are you against genocide? The answer is yes, I'm against genocide, but your question is flawed. Anyway, we can go into that more, but my biggest concern is that the political pressure that can be put on American universities, where there should be a sense of academic freedom and freedom of discourse, I think is going to be chilling. And the fact that a Penn donor threatened to withhold a $100 million contribution if the president did not resign or was not ousted, I think is dangerous. To have wealthy people basically telling the universities what can and can't be said is very dangerous. So I think this is a discussion that's important for all of us to have. What are the limits of free speech, and what should be the outside pressures from politicians or from wealthy donors?
Mm-hmm. So, Peter, you are teaching in the American University there. And the thing is, do you see that the answers, if you look back, of course, the president of the university, they tend to give accurate answers, accurate replies to a seemingly simple question. But of course, that caused a lot of a problem here. So what's your response when you see, it becoming such a controversial issue inside the U.S.?
Well, as Rick has said, the presidents were lawyered up, and they were advised to walk a fine line between free speech and criticism of what was going on. Their response was inept. It was unfortunate. They should have just condemned calls for genocide. However, I don't think there have been any calls for genocide, and there wasn't any evidence produced at the hearing that there were calls for genocide. What Stefanik did was she talked about intifada. Intifada means uprising. technically, literally, it means shaking off. That is not the same thing as genocide. American campuses are very polarized right now on a lot of issues. And we know that from the polling that 70% of those between the ages of 18 and 34 are opposed to the Biden administration's policy of uncritical blanket support for Israel. So on the campuses, the mood is very sympathetic to the Palestinian victims. That's the real issue on the campuses, that more than 17,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed, and that 60% of the housing is destroyed. People are starving, and that's created, fortunately, a sense of identification with the Palestinian victims on the campuses. That's understandable, and in fact, that's praiseworthy. But what the Republicans like Stefanik, and Stefanik has a long history of supporting Donald Trump who meets with Kanye West and what's his name, Nick Fuentes, Holocaust deniers, and doesn't criticize that at all, is using this politically, partly as part of this Republican campaign against the universities. And why don't the Republicans like the universities? Because the last institution that remains in the United States life that is strongly progressive. And so the issue is not just what these university presidents said, which was unfortunate and was bumbling and inept, but the broader Republican campaign against the universities, an institution that is strongly anti-Republican in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll come back to some of the points mentioned by our speakers. Obviously, very, it's worth a detailed discussion. But before that, Glenn, I want your insight, your observation about what's happening in the United States, sitting from Europe.
Well, we have some of the same challenges here, of course, but it seems to be stronger in the United States simply because this connection between the U.S. and Israel is much stronger than it is here between Europe and Israel. Of course, different European countries. The Germans are perhaps the most supportive now of Israel, and well, you can call this historical guilt or empathy for their difficult position. But we have similar problems because we also have an issue now with freedom of speech at universities as well. Of course, freedom of speech doesn't include incitement to violence, so calling for genocide has never fallen under what is considered to be free speech. But we see that the context here as well seems to be manipulated because, as we see, Israel is also an occupying power, that it's occupying Palestinian lands. So if you argue that Israelis must leave Palestinian land, that can be contextualized, of course, on one side as decolonization, but we see on the other side they're presenting this as a demand for ethnic cleansing of Israelis. So if you criticize the Israelis' ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, this can be construed as being a call for ethnic cleansing of Israelis. So it's a rhetorical trap, and I think this is what's really coloring a lot of this current discussions we're having, which is the effort of managing public perceptions, because we don't even consider this or refer to it as a conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. Rather, we talk about the Jews and Hamas, because it's very reasonable to criticize Israel or Zionism. But here in Europe, if you frame it as being critical of Jews, like an ethnic or religious minority, then this is not acceptable. But of course, it becomes a bit of a silly way of arguing. Imagine if all criticism of Iran was condemned as a hatred of Muslims. It doesn't really make sense. So it's a way of managing discussion to only accept one perspective. So. It's a great shame whenever academic freedom and freedom of speech is undermined in this manner, and again, I think that the problem, of course, is also by linking all Palestinians to Hamas, because this is also, either you support Jews or Hamas. This is a strange dichotomy, as you either, the victimized people, which Europeans victimized, or you're for either you support them or you support terrorism. It's a very weird way of presenting this conflict.
Like Rick, you both you and Peter mentioned about political influence or political campaign, I guess, against the universities in the United States. But also, it's mingled with freedom of speech. Of course, I remember the Republicans, they were not happy with the cancel culture, for example. They defended their practice. There's a lack of freedom. But now they are basically saying that, expressing something unpleasant or to the extreme of genocide. Of course, as Peter mentioned, there was no such a call. But that's the extremist point of view there. But still, I mean, how big an issue is that for the political influence on universities here?
Yeah, I think you pointed to two very important issues. One is that there is enough hypocrisy to go around in this political debate. I mean, for years on campuses, there have been people on the left saying, we don't want to have right-wing speakers. We don't want to have pro-Trump speakers. We don't want to have Vice President Pence when he was still close to Donald Trump come to campus because we object to their points of view. And now we're seeing the reverse from the right, where they want to say that you can't have this discussion. You cannot criticize Israeli actions in Gaza without being anti-Semitic. You cannot hold a Palestinian flag without being an extremist. And as we heard before, Donald has had meals with very prominent Holocaust deniers and anti-Jewish entertainers. So there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around. But in terms of the college campuses, I think we have to realize that this should be a place where you can demonstrate, where you can object to things. You can object to President Biden's position on arming Israel without conditions. You can object to the Israeli strategy. You can object to Benjamin Netanyahu. It's a difficult line. There is no line where you can't cross. You could not put a Nazi flag from your fraternity house. That would have crossed the line. But you could have a demonstration where you are for a point of view that's objectionable. My point here is that unpopular opinion needs to be protected on college campuses. That people should have a right to say things that would be objectionable to many, but there is a line that we don't really know. It's a vague line where you can't cross, and I think that the sentence that really is where the line is from the river to the sea, because that's seen by Palestinians as freedom. It's seen by Jews as they want to wipe us out. Israel has no place on the map. And I think that's where the politicians are coming in, and freedom is giving way to political might here.
Mm-hmm. Rick, talk more about this phrase "from river to the sea." For people who are outside the U.S., probably they're not familiar with this.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a very good point. So river to the sea means the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That Palestinians believe that the land of Palestine, which was a British protectorate before the British pulled out, Israel was formed. Palestinian nation was there for formation, never happened. Palestinian land in what became Israel was taken. 1948 was a year of trauma for Palestinians, a year of triumph for Jews, many of whom had survived the Holocaust in Europe in the years right before. But it is the motto of the Palestinians that we have a right to land from the river to the sea. But so many Israelis and many Jews around the world believe that is code for ethnic cleansing of Jews.
Well, Peter, so I mean, sometimes it's due to different understanding, different perception here. And in this way, like, I guess, I agree with where is the line of the freedom of speech, or where we should set a limit, probably. Some of the phrases are not acceptable or should not be repeated in the campus.
There has been a tendency to protect students from not having to hear anything that is objectionable or disturbing. And this has been increasing in recent years. We've seen it in terms of gender. We've seen it in terms of race. Now we're seeing it in terms of religion also. It reflects a healthy tendency to not hurt people. However, it's a way to also cut off discussion. As one person commented recently, the campus should be a place where people are physically safe, but intellectually unsafe. That people should be taught to deal with ideas that are challenging, that are disturbing. But what we've seen on campus in recent years is a tendency to protect people from not having to hear ideas that are challenging or threatening. And that's an unfortunate tendency. So I think freedom of speech is such an important value that is being undermined in the United States now. What we're seeing in this instance is you're seeing the media, you're seeing politicians, you're seeing hedge fund billionaires. These hedge fund billionaires who give money to these universities think that they should be able to control who the presidents are, what is being said on campus, create a climate. Some of us, have studied McCarthyism back in the 1950s, and that created a climate on the campuses where professors were purged, where there was almost no open discussion of alternative ideas. For the United States to be a great country, we need as much debate, as much discussion. There is very little open discussion in American media. If you challenge American empire, American foreign policy, you rarely get invited onto American mass media. But the campuses are still a place where there is openness to alternative points of view and ideas. And that needs to be preserved against the lynch mob led by these hedge fund billionaires, by these Republicans in Congress now, and by many people in the American media. And so this is a very important issue because it does deal with fundamental rights and freedom of speech and thinking in the United States.
So, Peter, are you saying that there is a concern of, say, academic freedom or the freedom of speech somehow could become, land in the pocket of the rich people because of the pressure or even the threat in some case, probably by the rich donors?
Well, what happened at University of Pennsylvania is these very wealthy donors who have been contributing up to $100 million in one case, are threatening to pull their money out and have begun to take steps to pull their money out. That's where the real pressure on President McGill at University of Pennsylvania came from. Mm-hmm. And then it got picked up by the Board of Trustees, who for the most cases are there because they are also donors to the university. There's often a tension between the faculty at the universities and the trustees. We want more faculty representation, more faculty voice. Who's got the real interest in the future of the university? There's a battle going on at many universities. At Harvard, we haven't seen quite as much. At Harvard, 650 professors signed a statement calling for the president to remain in office. At MIT, the trustees even came out with strong support for the president there. Penn was a different situation, and there the very wealthy donors to the university weighed in against the president. And this had been going on for months, because back in the summer, she had supported a Palestinian literary conference on campus, and many of them wanted to have that blocked initially. So she's been under the gun and criticized for months now. This was the final straw for these donors. It's tragic what happened there, and they should never have that kind of power over an academic institution, which is a search for knowledge, for truth, for understanding, for multiple points of view, and that was not happening at Penn, sadly, because it's a great university that should have better standards and represent something better in American life.
Well, Glenn, I wonder what's your response or what's your understanding of this? Peter mentioned about the media freedom, the press freedom. Probably somehow in practice, there's a sense of limit, or there's a limit. I mean, to what you are allowed to say, or whether your views are accepted to be on the platform of the public media.
Well, I very much agree with Peter. I think that the universities, the purpose of universities is to search for knowledge, and in order to do so, the ideas have to be able to be challenged and contested. And this is why it's quite difficult when you only permit one set of ideas by effectively manipulating it, by presenting it as any opposition as being effectively hatred. And I think this is where censorship began to grow. This was under so-called hate speech. Now, you can argue this has good intentions. It was political left first to advance these ideas that, we have to limit hate speech because we have to protect vulnerable minority groups. However, that being said, you also then make it instrumental for creating, for interpreting things as being hate. And I think that's also what Rick referred to. He mentioned the word code, that, what does that actually mean? Are they speaking in codes when they say from the river to the sea? But this is why you need free speech. You need to have this open discourse. What do you mean by river to the sea? If this discourse can be had and it's interpreted as a way of freedom, getting independence, not living under apartheid, then it should be fine. If it means we want to wipe out Jews, then obviously that's a very different thing, and it should be condemned and unacceptable. But this is why you need free speech, so people don't speak in codes. And again, this is why also it's problematic when we talk about if it's interpreted as inciting violence, because it feels like the supporters of what Israel is doing now are attempting to deliberately interpret any criticism of Israel and Zionism as being hatred of Jews. And I don't want to belittle anti-Semitism, because obviously this is a historical problem, especially here in Europe. It's disgusting. It should not be accepted, because criticizing Israel should also not be conflated with hating Jewish people. But it also has to be pointed out that Israel itself has worked very hard to make this connection by linking Israel to being Jewish, in which all legitimate criticism of Israel can then be condemned as hate speech. And we often see that the media, they jump on board with this simply because it's a lot more favorable than putting your neck out and challenging this way of censoring academics. But again, yeah.
Yeah, Glenn, do you think there's of course, related to this controversy, I would say, there's something to do with the U.S. policy of, many people to describe it, a pro-Israel policy, obviously. For example, recently the U.S. again becoming the only nation, vetoed the resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. So, despite this, there's a poll, like 68% of Americans saying Israel should call for a ceasefire and try to negotiate. The U.S. government is acting upon or against the will of the American public here.
Well, of course, there would never have been this need for censorship if the American government would have listened to its peoples. But again, this is a way of managing public perceptions because, yes, the United States provide political cover for Israel with this veto against a ceasefire, obviously being a way of condoning what it's doing. But again, the United States attempts to find a cautious position because they're not going to get in the way and restrict Israel. So, but again, they have to address this mass killings of civilians. So usually they find a way, you either blame Hamas or you claim to put pressure on Israel saying that they have to protect civilians. However, we see time and time again, this never moves beyond the rhetoric. That is, the United States might criticize what Israel has done, but it will still continue to supply the heavy weapons that are used against civilian targets. So it's I think it's very closely tied to U.S. policies because this is what managing public perception would be, or propaganda, if you will, which is you create a favorable lens to interpret all positions. So either you hate Jews and support terrorists, or you take the good side, and this is usually how it's managed.
Yeah, dichotomy here. So, Rick, of course, the president of the Penn University has decided to step down. There are pressures on the other two presidents of MIT and Harvard to do the same. So, what's likely to happen next?
Well, it's always hard to predict the future when you're in this hot political situation. My guess is the MIT president is going to be fine. There seems to be much stronger support at the level of trustees as well as faculty. Harvard, there is strong faculty support for the president, despite her halting performance at that hearing. But the right-wing media is just getting started. I mean, to use the metaphor of spilling blood in the water, I think that the president of Harvard would be a much bigger trophy for conservatives in America than the president of the University of Pennsylvania. And so while I think it is less likely that she will be forced out than she will remain, I would not at all understate the amount of pressure that's going to be put on from right-wing media and Republican politicians in coming weeks.
So, Peter, at least the politics will continue, if not the debate for freedom of speech.
In the context that we see, in the United States, you turn on the television, you can't help getting deluged with images of Palestinian victims and Palestinian suffering. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see what's going on in Palestine. No food, no water, no electricity, no health care, constant bombing. I mean, the Gaza is in ruins. And so you've got two different narratives. On the one hand, you've got the U.S. support for the killing that's going on there. On the other hand, you've got some concern about anti-Semitism on campus, which is really minor compared to, I hate anti-Semitism. There is no place for anti-Semitism in American life or anywhere. And we know the ugly history of this. But we also know that there is real mass killing going on a daily and an hourly basis right now in Gaza that's being done by the Netanyahu government. And Netanyahu is not popular among American Jews. Netanyahu is widely criticized by American Jews, and American Jews are not generally supportive of what Israel is doing now. And so the question of anti-Semitism is a real one, but it's not the way it's being portrayed by the Stefanic's of the world. So, what these presidents should have done is really go after her for her support for the Trump lies about the 2020 election, for so many of her
politics there. So, Professor, we have to stop there. Well, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thanks for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.